Let's talk about today's new David Pakman Show Member of the Day, of course made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Some people do say that conservatives are anti-science, but have you ever stopped to think that maybe science is what's anti-conservative? Yet another example, Lewis, of liberal bias. Find out more at liberalbias.com.
Do that.
Today's David Pakman Show new Member of the Day is Stephen Abernathy. Stephen Abernathy, spelling his name with a PH. I have to admit, I've always been confused about the origins of, when it comes to Stephen. Is there like a linguistic explanation, Natan, for why sometimes it's a V and sometimes it's a PH? Is it preference? I've never understood.
I'm not sure. It could be that the Stephen with the PH comes from like maybe a French adaptation of the same name, and the V comes from like a German one, but I'm not positive.
Interesting. What would you say, Lewis?
I would have to agree with Natan if I had to guess randomly.
All right. Well, Stephen Abernathy, Stephen with a PH, welcome to the David Pakman Show membership program. You can also sign up, and we'll talk about your name on the show, at davidpakman.com/membership. Let's talk about Jared Lee Loughner. Jared Lee Loughner, the Gabrielle Giffords shooter from Arizona, has pled guilty to the Arizona shooting, and he's received a life sentence. It started in a very weird way with Loughner acting in a very bizarre way. We'll get into some of those details. He pled guilty to 19 charges of murder and attempted murder in connection with the rampage in Tucson. The final plea agreement, according to Huffington Post, is he pleads guilty to the 19 counts, including attempted assassination of a member of Congress, murder and attempted murder of federal employees, and causing death and injury at a federally provided activity. And as part of the agreement, the federal government dropped 30 other counts. Long story short, he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. What do you think, Lewis? Some people angry that there was that there is not death penalty here. You have many times said you think life in prison is actually worse than the death penalty.
Yeah, I think the death penalty is an easy way out, to be honest. I mean, I would rather die than spend life in prison, especially if it's a rough prison and you are a hated person. I mean, things could be a lot worse for you in prison.
Well, okay, I'm not denying that, but Natan, he's kind of saying that he thinks life in prison is worse than the death penalty because of some of the realities of being in prison that really shouldn't be there. I mean, in other words, in theory, prisons should be safe places for the prisoners, although we know that many child molesters and others are targeted and that they have to be watched even more closely, sometimes segregated. But that's not really, that can't be the reason why you think life in prison is worse than the death penalty, can it?
Well, if it is the reason, then if prison culture changed at some point, you would have to change your position based on that change. So,
exactly.
So it's like a kind of a fluid position there.
I think even forgetting about those aspects of it, assuming it were safe, I still think life in prison is probably worse than death.
According to the Washington Post, Loughner was wearing khakis. He sat quietly throughout the hearing. He smiled at one point, and that was when a psychologist was testifying about his competence, and the psychologist said that Loughner had bonded with one of the federal prison guards. That made Loughner kind of smile, which is interesting. After the hearing, Loughner's parents cried, they embraced. The victims were mostly expressionless, as is often the case in these horrible situations. I understand that Loughner was mentally ill, at least in some capacity, even though he was determined to be competent to stand trial. I am still frustrated, though, by the fact that he was able to snap, get his hands on guns, including a magazine with 30 bullets in it, and shoot so many people up, just like James Holmes did in Aurora, Colorado, who also had an incredible arsenal of weapons at his disposal when his grip on reality was admittedly slipping. It is very frustrating.
Is it?
Don't you think?
I mean, it's just so common.
It's common, but what I'm saying is, I think we're having a little bit of a misunderstanding. What I'm saying is, the situation of a person like this losing their grip on reality and becoming violent would be better if it was more difficult for them to access 30-round clips, for example.
Of course, but that's not going to change, unfortunately.
I don't know about that. Natan, do you think that it's that difficult to make it so that maybe Jared Loughner, as we said, if he was taken down when he had to reload, If he only had 10 bullets instead of 30 before having to reload, less people would have died. Is it that unreasonable to think that could change?
Yeah, I kind of take the opposite position to the one that Lewis just took and say that what's probably not going to change anytime soon, unfortunately, is the fact that there are going to be people like this that want to commit these crimes. But what we could do very easily if we restricted access to automatic weapons like this is the amount of damage that they cause.
We're just so, Americans are so embedded in the gun culture. It's
Some
just
Americans.
a lot of Americans. I would say more than you think.
It could be.
If you think about just how many people here in Western Massachusetts you know own an arsenal of weapons.
I guess 2.
Okay. I know the 2 you're thinking of, but yeah, I know a bunch.
Okay.
They're
Well, but you
everywhere.
work in a Hilltown bar.
Still. It's still Western Massachusetts.
It's
a lot of
skewed,
people
yeah,
wouldn't make
yeah.
that association.
It's
So-
not a place where you would assume everybody's got guns, but a lot of people have guns even here. You have to assume in states that are much more at the forefront of the less gun restriction argument debate, it's even more prevalent.
You wouldn't think the gun lobby has as much pull as some of the bigger lobbies, but I mean, apparently they do, because
Absolutely they do.
We're not seeing much change.
All right, let's take a break. Facebook.com/David Pakman Show. You can also get T-shirts like the one Lewis is wearing, made from 100% recycled materials at davidpakman.com/gear. We'll take a break. We'll be back with Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks. So much more I still want to tell you about. So stay tuned.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.